We are here in downtown Atlanta at Georgia State University. We are going to go on campus and ask students, are you voting for Trump or Kamala Harris? So are you voting, would you be supporting Kamala Harris or Donald Trump in November?
Kamala Harris.
Okay, and why?
So I'm supporting Kamala Harris for a couple reasons. Number one, climate change. I feel like Republicans are not really recognizing climate change for the issue that it is. They're still talking about, do you believe in climate change? And we know it's happening, it's a fact. So number one is climate change. Number two is education. Public education is under attack from conservatives. They want to keep funneling money away from public education and into private, unaccountable schools. And then I think climate change, public education, and I would just have to say, the third reason, because I like threes, I have to give it to health and education. I mean, well, not just health and education. I'd say health, education, and safety. I feel like Democrats do a better job of protecting workers.
Okay, so as to your point of climate change, are you specifically talking about man-made climate change or the overall environment and the health and wellness of American people?
Man-made climate change.
Okay. So how do you feel about RFK being on Trump's ticket talking about we need to get fluoride out of the water because it's decreasing our IQ, all these poisons in our food, all these bioengineered food ingredients? Is that big to you as well?
It is. I agree with RFK. He actually did a lot of really good work while he was an environmental lawyer, but I don't know why you as an environmental lawyer would join teams with Donald Trump, who has consistently said that he wants to dismantle the EPA. Those two things, to me, they don't mix. You can't, on the one hand, want to protect the environment, but then dismantle and underfund the same people whose job it is to protect the environment.
So do you feel like health and wellness of Americans have gotten better or worse in the last, let's say, 4 years?
I think in the last 4 years, health and safety, I feel like it's been up and down. I feel like some things have gotten better, some things have gotten worse. I think that healthcare, for example, I think that's gotten better actually under Democrats. I think that worker protections have gotten better under Democrats. There's definitely room for improvement on things like safety in some cities and in some states. But I think generally it depends on the topic. It can go up or down depending on the topic.
So what do you say to people that say in the 70s they said that we're going to have the big freeze, that the world was going to freeze over, and then in the 80s it became a hole in the ozone layer. In the 90s they said it was global warming, and now it's climate change. What do you say to those people who say, well, every generation they say we have a problem with the earth and we're still around?
I think when you hear 99% of scientists saying the same thing, I think it's safe to believe them. And honestly, it's been consistent throughout. They have been ringing the alarm bells really since the 90s on global warming, and then they kind of transitioned it and started calling it climate change so that it wouldn't be so scary for everybody. But no matter how you slice it, since the 80s and 90s, we have known that the world is progressively getting hotter. We can't keep having the hottest summer on record every year. Every year, something is breaking the record, whether it's a storm, whether it's the heat of the summer, the cold of the winter, a tornado. Like, every single year is not a freak accident.
So let me ask you, since you believe in climate change, what are you okay with Americans paying more taxes to the government to solve climate change, or giving up a lot of the things that we take for granted, such as air conditioning and flying on planes and having global shipping and things like that, especially for and making energy more expensive, because we know that the poor are the biggest impacted by rising costs of energy, which we have right now?
I think that's a really tough one because climate change is going to require us to take bold action, but a lot of our systems and institutions are not in a position to take bold action yet. And so do I think that people should be forced to pay higher prices for energy, higher taxes to the government? I think in some situations and in certain circumstances, yes. I think that we will have to pay more to accommodate the fact that our climate is changing. But I don't think that climate change is all about the government just taxing everyone and getting more and more money. A lot of things that relate to climate change aren't about money. It's about reducing emissions. And so yes, in some cases, reducing emissions will cost money because in order to reduce emissions, you're gonna have to do A or B. So I think that it needs to be a multi-pronged approach, but I think that the most important thing for right now is that we need to have the discussion. And the hardest part about our current political system is there are so many people who don't even want to have the conversation, who don't even want to acknowledge that the climate is changing and that it's a real emergency.
So how do you feel about people? So for instance, there's a document funded by a lot of universities in England that a lot of corporations support called Absolute Zero, where they say we can't just go to net zero, we have to go to absolute zero. So we have to shut down all shipping, we can't fly, we have to shut down commercial airlines, we have to basically allow ourselves to be hotter and pay more. Are you okay with taking those drastic actions for some kind of future where we're going to be happier all, according to them?
According to them, I don't know if I'm comfortable or not with saying, we can't have AC, we can't have global shipping, we can't have this, we can't have that. I think that we can and should find ways to really have our cake and eat it too. So I think, for example, like if you want to take coal, we do need to get off coal. We do, but that's going to take time. It's going to take, years. We cannot just stop using coal tomorrow. So what we need to do is, while we're still using coal, actively invest in learning how we can utilize other energy sources so that when we get to a point where we can stop using coal altogether, it's a seamless transition into whatever other energy sources we want to use, like nuclear, for example. I don't believe it has to be cold turkey, like we have to automatically stop doing this. I don't think that's practical. I think that would shut the world down in some cases, but I do think that we need to start studying other things and start, getting them ready to be used.
So how do you feel, because you mentioned nuclear power, and Democrats are very against nuclear power, but that would effectively solve all the issues we have with energy. Instead of wasting all this money building solar farms that get destroyed, and then it seeps into the ground and causes all this environmental danger, do you support the increased use of nuclear power to solve that problem?
I think that nuclear power is going to be the way of the future, to be honest with you. I think that some Democrats should revisit their position on it. Their concerns are valid. Nuclear energy, we don't fully understand the impact that it could have on the world, on the soil, on the water, on the air. We don't fully know that yet. So having concerns about nuclear power is valid. But what we do know right now is that it is considerably cleaner than coal. If we know that burning coal is killing the planet, we have to do something different. And if that means transitioning to nuclear power, for now even, I think it's worth a shot.
So it sounds like you disagree with the Democrats on that, where they're saying no nuclear power, we have to build in all new infrastructure, solar, wind, even getting power from waves. So it sounds like you disagree with them there, and I agree with you on that. I think nuclear power is a solution. I don't know why Democrats are not supporting it, but that's something else. But let's go on to the educational system. You said that that Trump wants to dismantle the Department of Education, I think you said the EPA. Are you comfortable with having one centralized body determine what every student in the country has to learn? Or would you rather say everyone's a little different, let them learn what's individually important to them?
So everyone is a little different, but I do still think there has to be national standards for education. It's just fundamentally unfair for students in New York to get a better education than students in Georgia. It's fundamentally unfair for students in California to have more opportunities to become more competitive applicants for college than students in Florida or Alabama. I think that when we talk about education, we have to look at it through the lens of what's some of the most fair for our students. And so, yes, there do need to be national standards. Now, does every single child in every single state and every single city and town need to learn the same thing? No. And in fact, some schools don't even have the resources to teach certain things. You've got students right here in rural Georgia who do not have computer science classes. They don't have a computer lab in their schools. So we can't force everyone to learn the same thing. But there still needs to be strides towards making sure that every student, no matter where they go to school, what state they're in, what city they're in, that they have access to great education.
So would you say to people that say we're spending more than ever per student right now on education, but our test results are getting lower and lower and education is falling in comparison to other countries, even though we're spending more and more?
We are spending more and more on it. But the problem is, we think that for education, the answer is spend, 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 when actually we need a culture shift around education. I wouldn't call myself a Republican, but we definitely need to keep spending. But when I say culture shift, what I mean is we need to get parents involved in their child's education. A lot of times parents don't want to get involved or don't get involved until their child is in dire straits. We need parents to get involved in their education. We need to fix the teacher shortage. That doesn't always come through paying teachers more. Sometimes that comes through really making teaching, really marketing it as the incredible profession that it is. So I think that fixing education, number one, is an issue of funding. All schools need to be funded as much as they possibly can be. But number two, it's about marketing the profession, marketing education as something that is useful and valuable to all. So it's about funding, it's about marketing, it's about attitudes and mind shifts. We need to really revamp how we do education in this country, because I grew up with parents who really instilled in me the value of education. A lot of students do not have that right now. And so that was really the difference maker for me, is having a family that supported me in pursuing education.
So you're saying that parents should have more of a role in educating the child, which kind of goes back to what I was alluding to before, where would you rather have a centralized body determining what everyone has to learn, or would you rather have it more individualized between the parents and the child? You also said something interesting about parents having more of an impact on their child's learning in school. How do you feel about the fact that more of a culture issue, that parents now in certain democratic states or in certain states, that they can't object to a child wanting to transition below the age of 18 and not having a say in the life of their own child? How do you feel about that?
So on that question specifically, I think that that story and that idea has gotten way overblown. You as a minor, as a 14 or 13-year-old, you cannot just walk into a doctor's office, say I want to transition, and the doctor say, okay, that's it, you're done. You're a minor, you can't make medical decisions for yourself. You have to have the consent of your parent. And not only the consent of your parent, but the funding of your parent. Because a medical transition or whatever, surgery or procedure you're having, that's gonna cost money. And so one thing that is really concerning to me is that a lot of people are really making it seem that students go to school in the morning as a boy and they come home at night as a girl. And we know that's not happening because in order to have a medical procedure, you have to have parental consent as a minor.
What if I told you that that's actually happening in states like Minnesota, Tim Waltz, Minnesota, which is called a sanctuary state, where they can cross state lines and then go to the government and then say, my parent won't let me transition, and then they will protect them and they will go ahead and do it and say the child has the ultimate say in this?
If a state like that exists, if that's happening in Minnesota, I think that that is something that that we should be looking at that from a policy perspective, not a political perspective. And so if students are coming into Minnesota or children and they're saying, I am not coming from a safe home, this is who I am, I need medical support, I am not really in a position to say they should not get that medical support because I don't know that child and I don't know what they're experiencing. So, and I think that honestly, when it comes to this talk that we've been having, not this talk that we've been having, but nationally about transgenderism, students transitioning, children transitioning, I think that we have taken a lot of the humanness out of that conversation, and we've made it, if you are doing this, you're hurting your child. If you're not doing this, you're hurting your child. And really what I have seen and what I've experienced and witnessed is that every single child is different. Every family is different. And somehow what bothers me is that Republicans understand that for everything else but with the medical decisions of families. Every family is different, every child is different, and if they need something different, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that.
But specifically, are you okay with children going to the government and saying, I want to transition, the government allowing them to transition and paying for it with taxpayer money without the consent of their parents?
Without the consent of their parents. I mean, that's a loaded statement, without the consent of their parents, because you can really only get medical procedures without the consent of your parent in very limited circumstances.
Unfortunately, that's not happening anymore. Now the children are going and they're saying that they're actually really looking at what parental rights mean. One of the members of parliament in Canada said a few months ago that there's no such thing as parental rights. Do you agree with those kinds of statements that said that the state takes precedent over the parents' wants of their own child?
I don't think that we have to have either or. I don't think that it has to be either the parent has rights or the state has rights. I think it needs to be a combination. And I think that we also have to remember that a lot of children are coming from parentless homes. And when I say parentless homes, I mean either they do not have parents in the home or they have parents in the home who are not being parents, who are neglecting their child. And I don't want to say that they're abusing their child, but we all know people who have been raised by parents who weren't at home, who weren't supporting them, who weren't guiding them, who weren't there for them. So that's what I mean when I say parentless homes. So what I think that we have to have the conversation about is, on an individual basis, what does this child need? Do I think that we should have blanket policies that any child can cross a state line and get a medical procedure without consent of their parent? I think that could run into a lot of problems very quickly. But do I think on an individual basis we need to evaluate students, children, and their families and then go from there in making decisions? I do think that we should do that on an individual basis.
Got it. And more of a general statement, do you think it's okay for any person under the legal age of 18 to have a medical procedure like chemically castrating themselves that's a lifelong decision with a child who has not gone through puberty yet?
That's a complicated question because, there's all kinds of data being thrown around now about how, children are doing this and then later in life, how do they feel about it? Or children are doing this and then later in life they're having some type of medical complication that they couldn't have foreseen. I think that what I've seen, on the news, in person, when I've talked to people, is that when you have a child that wants to transition, it's one of the most difficult decisions that you could ever help them make. And I think that what we need to do, less than telling them, yes, you can do this and no, you can't do that, I think it's more about we need to have robust education for children and families on, if this is the procedure that you want, this is what you're signing up for and this is what you're going to get. And I think that you'll find that a lot of them are okay with that. You know what I mean? I think a lot of children, they have an idea, not an idea, but they know who they are. They know who they are and they're willing to pursue that with the support of their family. So I think that it needs to be less of this is what you can do, this is what you can't do, and more of a robust, education of children and families on medical procedures like this. I mean, and I even think about when I've gone to the doctor with my own mother, they really make sure that anything that we're doing, that the doctor sits down and really makes it clear, this is what you're doing, this is the potential complications, this is the potential benefits, and I would hope those conversations, and I do know those conversations are happening.
Okay. Well, I mean, it sounds like you have some conservative tendencies in yourself with like more of the self-individual and making your own decisions and things like that. So, I mean,
I think that a lot of times we try to put ourselves neatly into I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, I'm an independent. I don't think that we as people fit neatly into any box. I do identify as, I don't want to say identify, I am a Democrat. I'm a Democrat, I vote Democrat regularly, but sometimes I hear Republicans say things and I'm like, yeah. But 99% of the times I hear Republicans say something and I'm like, no. But I think that's okay. We don't fit neatly into every box. Sometimes I agree with Democrats, sometimes I agree with Republicans, sometimes Republicans agree with Democrats, and we should welcome that because that's how policy gets formed. It can't just be the Democrats are right and the Republicans are wrong, or the Republicans are right and the Democrats are wrong. It can't be that way.
last question. Do you think the economy, from what you're feeling, prices and everything else, how people are feeling, their health, their wellness, do you feel like it was better under Trump or under Biden-Harris?
Ooh, that's a hard one. Was the economy better under Trump or was it better under Biden-Harris?
Just you, let's say like subjectively.
Subjectively, how does the economy feel to me? The economy is tough right now. I'm not gonna lie, the economy is getting tougher, but we can't forget that we had the pandemic, and the pandemic really put a wrench in so many of our plans and so many of the aspects and features of our economy. So I am not quick to blame Trump or Biden for the state of the economy right now. And also what I know and what we've all learned is that economic policies, they take years to really feel the full benefits of. So the policies that Trump implemented during his term, we didn't really start feeling those until the Biden-Harris administration. And the Biden-Harris administration, their policies, we're not really going to feel those until much later. I mean, I think about even like the Obama years, for example. Trump came in on a really solid economy, and that was thanks in part to a lot of the policies of the Obama era. So even though the Obama era didn't feel the impact as much, the Trump administration did. So when it comes to the economy, it's a little more complex because just, how long it takes these policies to be implemented. But to answer your question, was the economy better under Trump? It was a little bit better under Trump, but I personally don't credit that to Donald Trump because I don't think that he's looking out for people like me. When I hear him talking about tax cuts, that's not a tax cut for me every time. That's a tax cut for people who are making considerably more than I am sometimes.
So how do you feel about the fact that with the Trump tax cuts that he passed, the average family has $200 extra a month, and I think, David, the stat is what minority families have about $5,000 extra every single year, which is the highest that they've ever had. So when you say people like me, I assume you mean black. So,
yeah.
Okay.
Or people like me in a certain socioeconomic class. And look, I absolutely will give credit where it's due. If the Trump tax cut has really had that impact and families have more money, that's absolutely something to celebrate. I think in the same way the child tax credit that's been championed by Democrats, I think that's also something to celebrate. I think that both sides, their economic platforms, they've got some really solid pieces and they've got some really weak pieces. I think that sometimes Democrats tend to overregulate, and I think that sometimes Republicans tend to underregulate. So both of their economic platforms and packages have benefits and cons. I feel like for me, what I look at is, can I stomach the cons in exchange for these benefits?
And that was Georgia State University students answering some questions. A lot of them seem to be closet conservatives. They just don't know it yet. So I'm happy to see that.